All right, pre-calc, section 1-4. We are going to look at domain and range and also zeros. So first of all, the graph of a function. In 1-3, we were talking about what makes it a function, and we were uh, plugging in points. We were plugging in inputs and finding outputs. Here we're looking at the graph, where this graph is a collection of all the ordered pairs of the inputs, outputs. That's where, right here, I'm looking, input slash or comma output as our x and our y value. Here they're talking about the x being the directed distance from the y-axis. So here's our y-axis. The x would be how far we are from the y-axis. And the f of x would be how far we are from the x-axis, so distance. We're going to find the domain and range. We've talked about what the domain and the range mean. Remember, the domain is a collection of all the x values, and the range would be the collection of all the y values. So we're going to start with finding the domain. So question A. And I'm going to put this in interval notation since that's what we're using now. And for the domain, I'm looking at this particular graph. I'm going to look all the way to the left and see how far to the left it goes. We have the ordered pair -1, 1. And then we keep following and it goes all the way to the right to 5, 2. So I'm looking at -1 to 5, but it does not include 5. So we're going to start with -1 and then goes to 5. Does not include 5, so we have our parenthesis rather than the bracket. Question B, we're going to do f of -1. Now, there is not an equation. There's just an f of x here. So when we want to know f of -1, we can look at the graph and we can find where x is -1 on the graph. Sorry, where x is -1 on the graph. And then we look to find the y value. And here it is as an ordered pair. There's the y value, or the f of x, the output. So we can just write 1 for that. And then f of 2. So I'm going to look on the graph, and we're going to go look at when x is 2. And here, when x is 2, y is -3. So f of 2 is -3. And then c is the range. So we're looking down to up. We're looking at this entire function at the lowest point to the highest point. And it looks like the very lowest point is -2, -3. The very highest point is 0, 3. So we look at the y values going from -3 to +3. And it includes this section as well, because the y values in here are somewhere in between -3 to +3. This section over here as well. Again, the highest value for y is 3. The lowest value for y is -3. Everything else is in between. So the range is going to be -3 to +3. And there are closed points, so we'll have a closed bracket for those. Zeros of a function are something that you covered in Algebra 2. The zeros of a function would be when it would be what x values, when we plug them in, it makes the output, the f of x, equal to 0. So we're going to find the zeros of the function. Zeros are written as a single number. Up here it says the graph of a function x has an x-intercept at a0. Then a is a 0. So these are going to be a single number. Where the intercept itself would be an ordered pair. So we're going to find the zeros of each function. So the first thing I'm going to do is plug in 0 for f of x, because that's what we're trying to solve for. Sorry, that was a little bit messy. Let me fix that 10. All right, and then we can use procedures for solving that we covered in Algebra 2. And there's a reason why we went over factoring the other day. This would be an excellent place to use factoring if it's possible. So I'm going to see if I can factor this um, equation right here. Equation expression. So I'm going to do guess and check. This is 3x squared, so it's got to be a 3x and an x. This last sign is negative. That means I'm going to have a positive and a negative. And we've got a 10. It could be 10 and 1. It could be 2 and 5. Just seeing that I need a 1 in the middle, I'm kind of thinking it's a 2 and 5. So I'm going to put a 2 here and a 5 here. Just kind of thinking as I'm putting them down, this is going to give me a 6x and this is going to give me a 5x, which we can make into 1 as long as 6 is positive and 5 is negative. So I'm going to put the 5 here, or the negative 5 here, and then the positive 2 there. So now I have it factored correctly. When you solve an equation by factoring, once it has to be equal to 0 to do this, but once it's equal to 0 and we factor it, now we are trying to figure out if this section right here, if this 3x minus 5, if that equals 0, then it doesn't matter what x plus 2 is, because you have to multiply by 0. And then we think about that a second way. If x plus 2 is equal to 0, it doesn't matter what 3x minus 5 is, because you multiply anything by 0 and you get 0. So because of that, I'm going to set up 3x plus 5 equals 0, and I'm going to figure out what x has to be to make this 0. I'm also going to figure out x plus 2 equals 0, which is negative 2. Oops. And then what is this one? Negative 5. So if x was negative 5/3, this would be 0, which would make both, when they multiply together, equal to 0. If this was negative 2, we would have 0 here. Multiply by anything, and we would have 0. So I've got my two zeros. X equals, I'm going to list the zeros in numerical order, and I'm going to list them in a set of numbers. So I just have to determine which one is more negative. And that would be my list of zeros. All right, how about question B? All right, so I'm going to put in 0. And I'm going to think I have to get to x by itself. So in order to cancel out a square root, we're going to square both sides. We're doing the inverse operation. The square and the square root cancel out. I'm going to move the x squared over. Square root both sides, but when you put in the square root like that, you have to have the plus minus with it. Square root of 10 is not like a number that, it's not a perfect square. So I'm just going to leave it as square root of 10, or plus minus square root of 10. I'm not going to find the decimal approximation. And to write this as the zeros, we can write x equals fancy bracket. Since it's just plus minus square root 10, you can write it that way. You could also write it as square root of negative 10 comma square root 10. Just thinking about Canvas, you'll see this when we get to type stuff in. But for Canvas, when you type in square root, you would have to type it in like, SQRT parenthesis 10. Or you would do negative SQRT parenthesis 10. There's not a plus minus. So on Canvas, usually I would leave you 2 blanks and you would put them in numerical order. All right, the third one, we're going to make h of t 0. And for this, I'm going to cross multiply. So I'll get t plus 5 equals 0, or multiplied by 0, so that's 0. And then 1 times 2t minus 3, so we get 2t minus 3. We solve that equation, add 3, divide by 2, and I get t equals 3 over 2. And that's the only answer for this particular question. Now, below I have screenshotted the graphs for each of these. So for the one in purple, the first one, the zeros were at -2 and -5/3. You'll see for this quadratic, they hit the x-axis at -2, 0, and -5/3, 0. And then down below, they've written these are the zeros. They wrote them separate. It's fine to write them separate, but when we put answers in Canvas, I would have you like x equals, and then I would do this, and then you'd have like blank, comma, blank for you to plug it in yourself. Or I might just have x equals, and then you would type in all of the numbers in the correct order with commas. So that's why I'm showing you how to do it that way. Anyway, and then for this one, we had the zeros at plus and minus square root 10. This one was the square root. So it was a positive square root, and it ends up being a circle. So we've got half a circle here. Since it's positive, it's not plus and minus. And then the x-intercepts are at negative square root 10, positive square root 10. And then this third one, this rational function, we just have this one x-intercept at 3/2, 0. So that is our only 0. Okay, so that's it for notes for 1-4. That's all we're doing. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Yay.